By way of introductions, my name is Jake Kempfer. I lead sales here at Join. I have about a decade of experience in AEC technology. Also on the meeting here is Jim Forrester. He's going to be running the presentation for you today. Jim has practice experience as a mechanical engineer and about 30 years of experience in AEC technology. Jim has founded and led multiple software companies and currently serves as a co-founder and head of business development here at Join. Also on the call is Gustav Chodo, head of customer success here at Join. Gustav has about 15 years of construction technology and practice experience, and as a recovering estimator serves as the president of the American Society of Professional Estimators Golden Gate chapter. As for today's agenda, we're going to start off with why collaboration is important on your projects, following that up with how you can effectively collaborate on cost-related items on your jobs, and then we're going to wrap up with a presentation of the Join platform and Q&A. With that, I'll pass it over to Jim to go ahead and get started with the presentation. Thank you all for attending today.
Great, thank you, Jake. All right, so I'm going to do a quick little slide presentation on a few different topics that are more factual than strictly about Join, and then get into a product demonstration that shows how Join actually meets some of these challenges. The first of which is the importance of collaboration. It's critical to the success of a project, and research from multiple sources supports the clear association between collaboration and the impact it has on controlling cost and schedule. Better collaboration also creates a more satisfactory work environment that brings out the best in the project teams. And I'm sure you can all relate to this in your own projects where you've perhaps had a more contentious atmosphere that's led to much less trust and people having difficulty with open dialogue around some of the challenges that the project is undergoing. So the Design-Build Institute of America, DBIA, was interested in understanding what teams found most important for effective collaboration. And as you can see in the image on the left, it's not surprising that honesty is at the top of the list, followed pretty closely by active listening. And interestingly, creativity was also noted as very important, but was deemed pretty consistently as lower priority. And so all of these things really are imperative for a team to be effective in collaboration, and honesty really is the leading tenet. So why is this most important during pre-construction? And so collaboration is something that has been studied quite a bit. This slide is borrowed from the famous Patrick McLamy curve. Patrick was the CEO at HOK and really was a voice of change in our industry through his efforts both at HOK and through the Building Smart community. What you see on this slide is time and project milestones on the x-axis and cost and the impact of change charted on the y-axis. And so the line that starts up in the lower left here and curves upward is the cost of design change. And again, no surprise, as you get further on into late in pre-construction into execution, any design changes are going to have a pretty dramatic cost impact on the project. And similarly, this line that starts up here and sort of dives down is the ability to affect outcomes. So early on, you can explore a lot of different things. It's not going to have a dramatic impact on sort of the suitability of the project, the constructability. But as you get further on, all of these things tend to really be able to diminish more as you get to the point where the project is actually being fabricated. And so this really emphasizes the pre-construction phase is the chance you have to really make the biggest impact on a successful outcome of a project. And just as a side note, this slide is actually part of a series that addresses some of the sort of modern day statistics around the McLamy curve. And my colleague Andrew Zukoski did a nice blog post on this at our website. If you want to find out more, please check it out. So it's not surprising then to find that in the last 10 years, we've seen a dramatic shift towards more collaborative contract structures, and mainly design build, construction management, risk, et cetera, types of contracts. And FMI did a study on behalf of the DBIA in 2018, which is where I got these images from, and a direct quote from them that has sort of led to this, which is, dissatisfaction with the adversarial nature and limitations of design, bid, build as well as increasing challenges around project characteristics and demands, has resulted in greater interest and use of design build and other alternative methods. And it goes on to say that this is really driven by the negative project owner experience and perceptions of design bid build, traditional, hard cost projects, as being most limited in terms of their opportunity for innovation and inability to fast track the process. So these negotiated bid types of contracts that we're seeing, which is the vast majority of what we're doing now in the US, really incentivize the team to work more closely together and reduce the surprises that come up during execution. And the direct byproduct of that is, again, that collaboration is much more important than ever before. So if I look at this a bit more closely, we can see with sort of the traditional design bid build model here at the top, that there are few collaborative opportunities for the teams to come together. You have a long design phase, then a very short sort of bid phase where there's a lot of evaluation and a quick turn into execution and build. And what tends to happen is there's always a series of potential change orders that come about of things that are either unclear or missed, and these lead to usually and oftentimes a contentious value engineering process, which doesn't help the projects at all. The number of collaborative iterations increases dramatically with more of sort of the present situation with design build CMAR types of projects. And it's important to note that iteration is good. It allows the teams to catch unbuildable or costly designs changes before it's too late. So this is a time when a feedback loop starts to get introduced into the process around cost and schedule impacts. And it helps inform all of the stakeholders much more effectively. So, it's important also to note that value engineering is still taking place, but it's done on a much more frequent and less contentious basis. And it's really more about ensuring cost estimates align with our target budgets. And as we evolve this model further into the future with things like progressive design build, et cetera, the amount of iteration is only going to continue to accelerate. And that's just going to force decision-making to keep pace. And this pace is going to really challenge the traditional tools and technologies that we've been using to manage this process, which is spreadsheets, email, phone calls, and really force us into a much more collaborative software framework like Join that supports these project delivery models. And as we continue to move away from traditional lump sum or hard bid project deliveries, gaining cost certainty becomes much more fluid and difficult. And so in this graph, what you can see on the left in the image is how costs that might be really sort of rough estimates early on in terms of rough order of magnitude or ROM costs really dominate at the beginning of a project, and over time they diminish as you get greater cost certainty by involving input from the general contractors, from the trade contractors. You get to the point where you're potentially actually bidding stuff out because critical path activities like foundations or steel might need to be done very early, even though you may still be working on some design iterations for other parts of the project. So while early on in a project, collaboration might be mostly between the GC, general contractor, the owner, and many of the design specialists, as you move further along, it's going to naturally extend to include those involved in project execution, including the trades, product suppliers, et cetera. And all along the way, there's multiple decisions about design options, product substitutions, alternative means and methods that require collaboration from all of these different stakeholders. So it's really not surprising that there are many parties that are needed to resolve cost and design issues. And although this process is typically led and coordinated by the GC, each of these groups has multiple parties involved. So for example, an owner may bring aboard a construction management consultant to evaluate costs and schedule. And the design team has a lot of specialty engineering firms that are involved with the MEP or structural or civil aspects of the project design, et cetera. And what's complicated about this is as we iterate more with collaborative contract delivery models, it involves considering increasing numbers of ideas that can deliver the highest value for the project. And making decisions is hard without all the right information at your fingertips. So if we look at the process of vetting a single idea under consideration, be it a value engineering item, a design option, or a product evaluation, our current tools for handling this process create a very fragile network of dependencies just for making a single decision. There's multiple choke points, different modalities, none of which are collaborative and transparent. And so it makes it really difficult to source new ideas from the team without adding undue complexity and risk that something's going to be missed or misrepresented or miscalculated, and ultimately making it harder for someone who's making the decision to trust the information that's in front of them. So further evaluating this process of the number of ideas that you might need to consider, it's worth noting that most of the ideas that people volunteer are relatively small. So this graph shows the relative impact of ideas on a project budget, and the data comes from project models that are managed in Join for multiple different construction project types and locations across the US. So everything from hospitals to parking structures. And what we find is the vast majority of ideas that people come up with have a relatively small impact of only about 0.1 to a quarter of a percent of the project budget. So way up here on the upper left, there's lots of ideas that sort of fit into this category. And as we get into the different things that are going to have a big impact on project budget in the 1% or greater range, these are very few and very small number of them for us to really consider. So if we have to look at mostly this end of the curve for all of the different ideas I need to consider to get a project to budget, how many ideas do I need to source? So with this graph, I have sort of a different set of matrices that show sort of what types of ideas I might need to consider. So along the bottom, you'll see different rows for the fraction of items that your team might typically accept. So maybe it's 1 in 10, 1 in 5, what have you, ideas that come up that your team tends to approve and go forward with. So if, for example, you've got a 5% cost reduction you need to pull out of the budget and your team tends to accept 1 in 5, you're going to need to come up with 122 unique ideas from the team. So that's a lot of ideas that really mandates everybody on the team is fully engaged in a highly collaborative framework, and that this is as transparent and accountable as possible. So how does Join solve these challenges? So let's take a look. So within Join, we always start in this dashboard view. And these dashboards are places that we aggregate the data that is coming from all of the items or ideas that have been volunteered in the project, as well as any of the cost or milestone data that is relevant for this phase of the project. So, for example, I'm in the current construction drawings phase of this project. This is the milestone I'm in. We did an estimate and I've got a gap to close between where our estimate is and our project budget. And along the way, people come up with ideas. Some ideas are going to help move cost down. Some ideas are going to add cost to the project. And as these ideas are proposed, they sort of will be automatically updated in this dashboard view. This is very much a target value design type of graph. And the color coding, as you look at any of these, are that the green is accepted, red is rejected, and yellow is it's still pending. And as they are either rejected or accepted, actually can see in real time exactly where my cost is trending at this point in time. So this is really helpful for teams coming together to look at, are we on the right path? Are we, if we're a cost challenged project, we should probably not be looking at some of these things that are going to add. We should be looking at some of the things down here and their relative size. And it's always good to look at how am I trending over multiple milestones. For example, if we had a huge gap at the beginning and we're closing that pretty nicely, that means we're going in the right direction. If instead we're diverging, that oftentimes is a really potent call to action for the teams really to be looking at some significant things that they might need to change. So this target value design trend line is really all about discussion. And if I slide down a little bit and look at how my estimate data might break down, this is a really nice graphical way for presenting to different stakeholders what the status of your estimate really looks like. Oftentimes people will use great estimating platforms like WinEst or Sage or others, and then have to create these different presentations for the different stakeholders to evaluate status. So being able to look at, for example, in terms of the services, we've got a pretty big gap we need to close on what we budgeted, a gap of close to $3 million, where in Shell I might have a little bit of room to borrow some of that budget. And this is just available to us by virtue of having some of the categorization capabilities that we can bring into Join, no matter how any of your work breakdown structures are organized, to be able to provide this information to you and pivot it very seamlessly. So for example, this is a campus demo project, and if I have different stakeholders on the campus that might need to see how things are broken down by their different scopes, it's really easy to be able to look at that by each of these representative groups, however they may need to see this information, and to be able to show, all right, if your budget is responsible for this particular scope, here's where you're looking in terms of any gap you might need to evaluate or room to still look at different options. And furthermore, as we look at graphically all of the different ideas that have been volunteered, this chart shows how they sort of stack up by status. What has been rejected? What's still pending? What's been accepted? And what's been accepted and already incorporated into the budget. And you can see as I hover over any of these, I've got an opportunity to really drill down and get into details. So it makes it really discoverable to find out, what is this item? What does it mean? Who accepted or rejected it? Who are the different stakeholders involved, et cetera. And similarly, if I want to pivot the data to look at how it might break down by stakeholders, I can do the same sort of thing. So again, if I'm the gymnasium, if I'm looking at that scope of work and I've got a gap to close, it looks like we accepted something that was going to bring in some cost add, but I have some room to close things and I need to really be focusing down here. What's interesting about this example that I'm hovering over is, here's an option that I'm potentially been given to explore. It's got one aspect of that option that has some cost add, and another aspect of it that if I accept will actually bring the cost down. So when you get different ideas that you can explore, sometimes it's really important to be able to look at this. I can either mutually identify these three things and be able to understand sort of one of them may add cost, one of them may deduct. So if I look at the different items that have been presented, for a lot of different people, this is the equivalent of a sort of a risk and opportunities or constructability log or a value engineering log that may be managed or maintained by different members of the team. And so what we're showing here are all of the different ideas for this particular milestone. I can look across all milestones if I want to. I can group and filter the information really easily. So for example, if I want to come back and look at it by building scope, because that's how I want to present it to different people, I can easily have that information summarized for me and look across sort of that at an aggregate view, and then drill down into any of those things I might want to look at. So again, if I'm looking at the gymnasium and I want to look at this particular example that I had shown earlier of the different options to explore, I can click right into it and see here are the different things that were on offer. There's just leave it as designed. Here's one that's going to actually sort of bring the cost down pretty dramatically, and then some of these others that are going to add to it. And as I open up any one of these, I can see the specifics that are provided. Who's got the responsibility for managing this item? When might it be due? Might it be categorized? Here's where cost was provided to us, and in this early phase of iteration, it's still a rough order of magnitude. I am the general contractor, so I am running with permissions that allow me to see information like markups that we need to track for how we're managing this project. If I were running as someone with a different set of permissions who doesn't have that capability, they wouldn't necessarily be able to see some of this information. So it's important to note that the roles and responsibilities of each of the different stakeholders do require that they have permissions that allow them to see and do different types of things. And that's really important for ensuring that people are collaborating and focusing on the different things that are most relevant to them. So if I go back to my list of different items and look at a couple of other things, for example, here's an example of a door substitution, for example, where maybe I've got a little more specificity, where I actually want to track the number of items because maybe the owner asked for it. They wanted to know how many of these there really are. And I want to also be able to keep track of where some of this information came from. Maybe I've got some supplemental information that's important to me. I've got a Revit model, for example, that gives me where I can zoom in on a view that shows exactly where these things are taking place. Or I've got specific cut sheets that talk about maybe an alternative that I want to present, or the relevant information that's appropriate for that. But maybe I have a question and I want to ask somebody on the team about this. I can really easily come in and just mention, for example, Ben Harris, who's the architect, to consider other alternatives. And what's going to happen is Ben's going to now get an email that has a link to this item, and Ben can log in and provide supplemental information. Ben could also just respond to that email directly, and that response will automatically get logged here in this history tab. And this history tab is really valuable. It gives you a full running status of everything that's taken place around this item. So who created it? How did the cost change? Did it transition through different milestones? Who accepted it? Who may have brought it back as a reconsideration? What supplemental information might be provided? All of that is logged and tracked, so you've got full accountability and traceability around any of the different things that people might have contributed to this item. I can even get more detailed in how I might want to look at breakdowns of things. So for example, in this example, maybe I need the trade contractor to get involved and provide me some unit costs and some specific types of categorizations for how they may want to look at how they're breaking out their information to provide it to me. Maybe I need that information broken out in a certain way as I'm trying to get to my guaranteed maximum price calculations, so that I've got confidence that I'm not duplicating effort in other scopes of work. So whether you use it at this level of detail or simply at a rough order of magnitude, we try to provide flexibility for how this information is created and tracked by all of the different team members. And what's almost most important is, I've got an idea, I want to come in here and volunteer something. I can click this create a new item button, and no matter what your role, be able to add it to the log. And then whether I have permissions to enter in cost or assignments or some of this other information or not, at least it's an idea that's worth considering. You and your team members can then get it in there and eliminate the bottlenecks that oftentimes occur as somebody's trying to manage this information and collate and collect it from various and sundry sources, especially right before a critical milestone or a project team meeting. So if I shift over and look at some of our estimate data, this is also an area where we need a fairly collaborative set of eyes on this information. Oftentimes, this information around estimates and how it might be managed is done by a general contractor in conjunction with some of their trade specialists, and it needs to be presented to different stakeholders. So this milestone report is a great way to be able to look at how this information is presented for all of the different stakeholders. So, for example, let me go back to my view of, I want to just clear everything and I want to look at it based on my building scope because I'm a building stakeholder, and then maybe uniform at level 1, just so that I can see how it might be broken out. It's really easy, as you can see, to just pivot this information and get much more detailed view of things. So this is the same graph I was seeing before about my how it's broken down by building scope, and also how the costs break out. So if I want to look at again in the gymnasium, which pieces and parts really belong to me, and what, how have we sort of moved along in some of these various and sundry areas based on the information that's been provided. And so these reports are really valuable. Oftentimes people want them in some immutable form. So if at any point you need to be able to generate something like a document for people that may want to have something for review ahead of time, it's very easy to just quickly generate a PDF by just a Control P action. And I can do that really anywhere in Join. And that's, again, really important because people collaborate in lots of different ways and need information in various forms for their different stakeholders. If I come back to my milestone view and I want to look at things in a little more detail, this is where I enter in perhaps detailed estimate information. Early on, you may get started with really high-level breakdowns of things, broken out by maybe uniformat or maybe any custom classification. However you choose to classify or break out your or use your work breakdown structures, Join supports that by allowing you to add any sort of columns to accommodate that and be able to pull this information in and use it for your presentation and allowing your team to understand its impact. Moving over to collaborators, I just want to touch on briefly the fact that Join is really meant to be used by multiple people. When I add a collaborator, all you really need to do is provide their email address and their role. And the roles are really important. This is what limits or enables their different permissions for them to be able to see, edit, or just view or not any of the different information within Join. So you've got the ability to make sure that the right information is visible and editable by these different stakeholders as you invite them to the team. And this really provides a lot of interesting dynamics. Some of the things we've seen with people using Join when they invite a very diverse quantity of people into the project is you get exposure to things that a lot of people haven't really been able to see before. Oftentimes they are on the receiving end of a sort of last minute notification of a potential design change. And it's really empowering to them to say, look, I really believe there's an idea that I want to be able to volunteer, or I've got some information to suggest about this related item based on what we learned in previous projects. It enables them to be much more collaborative and participate more effectively in your project. And I'll close with the presentation just by talking a little these categorizations. It's really easy to create any work breakdown structure that you need to manage your project. Every project is slightly different in how they need to be able to provide this information for the different stakeholders, and Join tries to make that as easy as possible for you. So with that, I'm going to switch back over to my presentation and talk in conclusion a little bit about just the world we're living in. This picture on the left was actually taken the second week of March. We had all of our team together in San Francisco. We are a distributed team, and enjoyed an evening out just to celebrate all being together. And within a week, the sort of world changed pretty dramatically. And you know, from the risks and threats of COVID-19 to the transformative phase of sort of the social environment we're in right now, there are a lot of things happening right now in our world. It's a very unique time in our history. And from a professional career perspective, many of us will probably look back and remember this period as a time sort of duality where there's this sense of personal isolation, everybody working from home, but also a pretty dramatic shift away from the office as the central focus of how we work on our projects. And so the project on the right is our team just taken earlier this week in one of our planning meetings. And I'm sure this is something that's familiar to all of you. This is somewhat of a new normal. So tools like Zoom and Google Hangouts and Microsoft Teams and others are really essential for us to be able to have this social dynamic, this face-to-face, regardless of where we are. And our business processes need more of these types of collaborative tools like Join, that allow you to ensure that work can take place transparently, collaboratively, anywhere, at any time. And so if you're not already well on this journey, I encourage all of you to explore what's out there in terms of collaborative platforms and to consider Join for your pre-construction collaboration software platform in the future. And with that, I will shift into any additional resources that you may want to look at. Check out our website. If you have some questions, reach out to us, hello@join.build. I mentioned some blog posts earlier about the McLamey curve, and also one you may be interested in, how to use Join to win work. There's a couple of good posts on that topic that have been pretty popular. So check that out. Feel free to contact us. We love input from people. We'd love to hear ideas about what we're doing and where we're going. So with that, I'd like to bring in my colleagues and see if there's any questions from the audience. I invite you to throw them into the Q&A section and share your thoughts.
Great presentation, Jim. So we do have several questions here from the audience. Let's just start at the top regarding the data that's in Join for this particular sample project. And I think the bigger question is, where is this data coming from? What software did you use to put these comparisons together? And where is the data coming from in this analysis?
So when I showed you the project demo project, it consisted of maybe 30 different ideas that have been suggested. Those ideas come from the project stakeholders. Now this is demo data, so we at Join sort of cooked this up, but we based this on sort of real world scenarios. Within your projects, you have lots of ideas that you tend to source from your different teams. Sometimes it's your estimating team, sometimes it's the VDC team. If you're a general contractor, sometimes it comes from the owner or the design team. So that's where all of those ideas come from. As they get aggregated within Join, we normalize them to look to see sort of what is their relative impact. So in the one slide I showed about their relative impact, that's sort of a normalization of some of those ideas. The estimate data oftentimes comes from where the GC might be managing some of their estimates as they iterate through the project, and they may be using a spreadsheet for that. They may be using something much more specific, like Destiny or ProEst or WinEst, etc. And oftentimes they will then need to present that information to the different stakeholders. So it's a very easy cut and paste of that information at the relative level that's needed to be able to bring it into Join to allow it to exist within our platform. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, and I think somebody entered a follow-up to that, just to clarify. They want to know who enters the data. Is it them as the GC or is it Join?
It's you guys. You guys are in charge of this information. It's available to you to enter and iterate on as your project demands require. As you get to certain milestone phases, we see projects get really busy with people being very engaged, and then it may go through a phase of sort of review and evaluation. Project teams get quiet, so it's all done by you guys. However, if you have a lot of historical data, be it in like VE logs, in spreadsheets, for example, we do have a tool that we can use to bulk import some of this information, so that if there's interest in looking at how we've done on past projects, we can work with you to bring some of that into some projects and allow you to look at that.
Thanks, Jim. So we have two questions. They're somewhat related. I'll ask them both because I think the answer is probably the same. The first one is, does this data share with other systems, say cost loaded, schedules, estimates, project financials? Does it sync with Sage Estimating or any other estimating platforms?
So not currently. This is an area of active involvement with our engineering team around ways to integrate more effectively with estimating tools out there. There are a number of them. They all have different ways in which we can integrate with them. The lowest common denominator is to be able to dump that information to a spreadsheet and or just cut and paste it straight into Join. We do not yet integrate with any of the other products and platforms you mentioned, Gustav, but we're very actively looking for use cases that are the high value areas of where you would like to see some of those. So if you've got some ideas there, we're collecting that information and looking to prioritize that as we continue to grow and evolve. We recognize the value of those other tools for what they do. They have an important place in the ecosystem. It's really important that we find ways to be able to allow you to work with them for what they do, especially those best-in-class products, and use Join for the things we do best, which is collaboration and transparency.
Thanks, Jim. And I think, yeah, you touched on something there. You can still take the data out of Join if you need to and bring it in. We just don't have an automatic at this point. Okay. The next question is about markups. Can the markups do iterative calculations like Excel?
They sure can. There's a lot of flexibility in how we do markups, and if you'd like to see that in more detail, I'd love to be able to just walk you through it and get further ideas. They're pretty flexible.
Thanks for that question, Philip. He's got another question here. Constructability was mentioned early on. Not all constructability items have a cost impact. Does it make sense to track constructability items in Join instead of a separate platform?
Absolutely. There's really no reason why you shouldn't. It oftentimes involves different stakeholders who have different ideas around the impacts. You typically will need an owner to say, look, I agree, this makes sense, let's go forward. So having that as part of your document record is important. Join's the perfect place to track that, as opposed to multiple spreadsheets where you've got it spread over different documents that are hard to aggregate.
Thanks, Jim. We got another one regarding collaborators. Do all collaborators need a license to edit?
The Join model is project-based. So if you are using Join for your project, you can have an unlimited number of users. We don't provide, there's no real difference in whether you've got 10 people or 100 people on the project from a cost perspective, regardless of their role. So we based our costing model, initially it's on sort of on a per project basis. If you want to get started with Join, it's on the construction value. If you want to get into being able to use Join everywhere under a subscription model, that's sort of based on sort of your business volume. And so we'd be happy to talk through those different models with you.
The next question is Join better than a spreadsheet at this point?
I'd like to say yes. You know, I'm an engineer and I love spreadsheets. So there's a lot of great things you can do with a spreadsheet, but for managing a process and a workflow, it's not easy to do, especially for this complex sort of set of stakeholders that are involved, where you need to have that history log. Who changed what? Why? Spreadsheets don't do that very well. Looking at options, being able to account for the costs associated with options to make sure you don't double dip or overcharge. Those are difficult to manage in a spreadsheet. So I love the flexibility of what a spreadsheet can do, but we've done a lot of work and continue and to do a lot of work around making Join as good as a spreadsheet for the things you need to do and better from a collaboration perspective.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, the next question's from Brett. My question is related to the lag between a decision and a cost. There are lots of reasons to make a decision during pre-con. Several of these result in costs later in the project. For example, a project may explore cheaper alternatives and price them later as a change order. Does Join help reconcile this cause and effect price lag problem?
It absolutely does, and that's because you take the lag out of it. If you recall the slide where I had all of the different sort of lines between the different players, if you come up with an idea and then you have to go back to the drawing board and go through that whole process over again, that introduces a natural lag of, maybe it's the next OAC meeting that you get an update. There's the opportunity to do all of this in real time. It eliminates the lag. It doesn't mean that people will hesitate to make decisions or that there may not be delays that come about, but it goes a long ways towards eliminating the potential for those sort of later stage surprises.
Thanks, Jim. We have another question here. Does Join have an estimating platform? Does the information from other estimating platforms paste seamlessly into Join?
So no and yes, respectively. You can use Join as a lightweight estimating platform. You may have recalled in the demo where I showed 3 different item examples where I actually had sort of quantities and I was doing quantity-based calculations. If you have things like that at that level that you want to track in Join, you certainly can. We are not providing sort of a database of costs associated with what labor might be in certain areas and materials in others, et cetera. Those are what you might use an estimating platform for, and for good reason. So by virtue of the power of some of those things that you can do in an estimating system, we've tried to make it as easy as possible to just paste the information into Join that's necessary.
And I think that answers the question Diana's asking here. Is there a list of estimating softwares they can integrate with Join? So I think basically the answer there is any software as long as you get the data into a copy paste format.
Correct.
So universal integration. Okay, does Join have an app that can be pulled into Microsoft Team platform? That's a new one.
No, I love the idea. We've had sort of the same sort of suggestion. Can I use it live with Zoom? Our product team loves these suggestions. I know that Jake is taking vigorous notes. So not at this time.
Well, I beg to differ there, Jim. You could just have Join open and share your screen.
Well, and that's what I've done. And so, I'd love to hear sort of what further integration might look like. I'm sure there's a specific use case. Reach out to us. Let's explore it.
All right. And let's see. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with a software called Unifier, Jim? The question is, how similar is Join to Unifier? I think Unifier is an Oracle product related to P6, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we're different in that, and I don't know Unifier well. So what we're looking to do is we are cloud-based. We are not trying to aggregate a lot of different things that sort of might be in a certain ecosystem, although Join is a good aggregator. So we're different from Unifier in that some of the workflow that we're looking to really enable is helping the team really come together around specific decisions that are necessary to get them to to their target budgets. So that's the best answer I can give you at this point. Again, I'd like to know what if this individual, just reach out to us. I'd love to walk through what you're doing there and see where we overlap.
And we got just a couple more here. Let's see, how difficult or complex is the copy and paste of an estimate into Join? Is there a particular format that the estimate needs to be in order to be inputted? Yeah.
As long as the columns line up, you can cut and paste away. As a matter of fact, Gustav did a terrific webinar on this that you can find in our in our help system around how to use Join with different estimating platforms and some of the tips and tricks around what you do for WinEst or Sage or what have you. So it's just a matter of making sure the columns line just like you would if you're cutting and pasting into Excel.
Okay, and this is the last 2 questions. I'm going to combine them because I think they're related. What is the cost of Join, and how can we try it on a project?
So I'd love to hear the specifics of your project. Reach out to us. We can give you some cost numbers. It takes literally seconds to set up a project and invite you to it, and off you go. So there's no time required for system learning or anything like that. So super easy. We've tried to make it very inexpensive, so love to talk about your specific case. Reach out to Jake at join.build or Jim at join.build or Gustav at join.build or hello at join.build, any of us, and we'd be happy to talk with you.
The key is join.build. That's the, and happy to help you and work with you guys as well.
So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing. I hope you found some of this information useful, and stay safe, and look forward to talking with you all soon. Over to you, Jake.
That's it. I'll just mention one last thing, reiterating Jim's point. If anyone has any questions about Join in particular, you're looking for a demo specific to your company or your needs, certainly feel free to reach out to me, Jake at join.build. Happy to meet with anyone on the call. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody. Thanks to all the ASP folks out there that joined.
Bye now.